So welcome to Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, chapter 53, the last and final chapter of part 1 of the Tanya, the Sefer Shel Beinonim, or as Rabbi Miller calls it, the book for in-betweeners, the book of the Beinonis. And we're doing chapter 53, which is titled again, What is the Shekhinah? This is the third chapter titled as such, and we're going to complete that thought today. And we're on page 669. It's a big book, the Tanya, huh? No wonder it took us 2 years. And so the Alter Rebbe continues the conversation built off what we learned in the first 2 chapters. So in the first chapter we just spoke about Shekhinah. What it would mean even that there can be a godly presence here. Is that not contradictory to the fact that God is unlimited? If you say that he's found somewhere, he's not found, etc. And we discussed that there's a concept called presence, which is really a word that we can use with regards to ourselves, right? Just to jog everybody's memories. We spoke. It was at that time that we brought the example, the analogy of the sun that shines into rooms. We brought the analogy of the soul, which courses through the body and in all, to all the limbs of the body and gives each body its power and its energy, and yet at the same time is not really located in any of them. So it's really more from the person perspective. In other words, from our perspective, or in the case of the sun, from the person's perspective, from the room, that we seem to see a lot of light in this room, but really, in terms of the sun, it doesn't make a difference. So that was the first. That was chapter 51. In chapter 52, we started to get a little bit Kabbalistic. We got very Kabbalistic, and I'm afraid I believe that there were many people that were not with us. But just to briefly summarize, we had spoken about this concept of Malchus, right? Malchus being the last level of the 10 attributes, and how in each realm, these attributes repeat themselves. So it starts again from Chachma and it goes down till Malchut, and it starts again from Chachma and it goes down till Malchut, right? So those 10 levels sort of cascade down and then start again and cascade down. Obviously, at each level, they're on a different plane. In other words, they re-evolve and they re-transition, I guess, from world to world until it gets down here. And in every single world, Malchus is the one that's called Shekhinah. Why? Because Malchus accepts from all of them, and it gives over to the next world. And so Malchus is, again, and at each level that might be lower, in other words, to us, this is the divine presence. Obviously, to Hashem, that doesn't limit him. But in each world, Malchus is sort of the giver, well, the receiver and the giver of the godly energy for that world. So in chapter 53, the Alter Rebbe starts to talk about it on a physical level. Oh, one more point we mentioned is last week we had mentioned about Torah. How in this instance, Malchus's main Shekhinah characteristic comes from Chachma, of Atzilut, right? In other words, the highest level, which is God's wisdom, which is the Torah. And so the Torah really courses light into the entire world. I think the last thing we did last week, right, Pam, remind me, is we had gone through different things that might be more understood. Now we have this understanding of Torah as the Shekhinah of the world. One of them was that God looks into the Torah and creates the world. There was another one, that's what I was asking you to remind me, that you had mentioned. I forgot what it was. Right? You remember? There was something. There was another phrase that we always say about the Torah that I forgot what it was. Anyways, but that Torah is sort of the source of light for the world. Fine. Source of godly light for the world. In chapter 53, the Alter Rebbe wants to know, so now let's get physical for a second, right? Okay, so the Torah, but we are, right? We said about a human being that the soul is found primarily in the head, and then it sort of courses throughout the rest of the body, right? Where is that in the world? As the Alter Rebbe reminds us that when the first holy temple was standing, the main place where the Shekhinah was, physically, in other words, the place where God chose, that should be a place where, and we already spoke with this concept of revelation, what it means that God is more revealed in certain places than other places. It's much more about the recipient than it is about God, the giver. But in temple times, the Shekhinah, the core of the Shekhinah, the focal point of the Shekhinah, which then coursed throughout the entire world, was the Beis HaMikdash, was the Holy Temple. An interesting note on that is that some of you may have heard that so first a note on Windows. A note on Windows, not the operating system, the glass panes, is that they've evolved a little bit over time. They used to be primary source of light in a room. Obviously, they had candles always, right? But windows were designed to bring light into a room. As a result, in general, windows were always curved inwards, or outwards, I guess. In other words, they were curved in a way that the opening to the outside was smaller than the opening to the inside, so that the sun was able to pour in and go wider in than it would out. Whereas in the Holy Temple, the windows, as are explained in the Talmud, were shkufos atumis, which means they were the exact opposite. It was almost as if the source of light is in the temple, and they would open up wider towards the outside, because this temple was sort of the source of light for the whole world. Obviously, the physical manifestation of that was only a metaphor or a symptom of the spiritual concept that was going on there, which is that in the Holy Temple was found the strongest form of godly light in this world, the most revealed form, let's call it, right? That was the best word we came up with last week. The most revealed form of godly light in this world. And from there it went out to the rest of the world. We find similar sayings with regards to other things. This was the Holy Temple. Now, what made the Holy Temple this way, right? So we're already familiar with the fact that Shekhinah was located in the Holy Temple, because we've discussed that before. Now we understand that the Shekhinah is really Malchus, or the Torah, and that finds itself in the Holy Temple. So how was that physically embodied? That was physically embodied because the 10 Commandments, really the entire Torah, but the 10 Commandments, which are the primary ones which we heard directly from God, which contained real godliness in them, and we'll talk about that in a moment, were found, right, the tablets which contained the 10 Commandments engraved on them, were located inside a box. Indiana Jones did his best to find it. He couldn't. The box was called the Ark, right? And that Ark was located where? Not just in the Holy Temple, but where? Anybody? Where in the Holy Temple?
In the Holy of Holies.
In the Holy of Holies. In the Kodesh HaKadoshim. In the holiest room in the Holy Temple. The room which only the Kohen Gadol, only the high priest could go into on Yom Kippur, etc., etc. And that was really the embodiment of holiness in this world. An embodiment of spirituality, of godliness here in this world.
You want to say embodiment or focus?
Both.
Okay.
Both. I guess focus would imply that it's all there. It was obviously meant to go out from there to other places. But and there's a couple things that we understand from that. Number one is we are told that before the Holy Temple, right? So in the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the traveling temple, which went through the desert, we're actually taught that Moshe Rabbeinu, so this is actually in 2 weeks ago's Torah portion, there's a contradiction in two terms. In one instance, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu heard God's voice coming from the Ohel Moed, from the tent of meeting, which was sort of the courtyard of the... And the other one was that he heard it from there's another verse that says that he heard it come from between the two cherubim. Anybody remember this?
Yes.
I believe Rabbi Hanoka spoke about it in his sermon. I think so. And the sort of synchronicity between the two of them, the solution to making the two of them work together, these two verses, is that Moshe Rabbeinu actually heard that he was actually found in the Ohel Moed, outside of the room with the ark and the cherubim which were on top of the ark, but that he would hear God's voice as if it was coming mibein shnei akruvim, as if it was coming from between those two. That's when even Moshe Rabbeinu was on such a high spiritual level, right? When he was on top of the mountain for 40 days, 40 nights, he didn't need any physical embodiment of godliness in this world in order to relate with God, right? When he was at the top of the mountain and was telling us the last of the last 8 of the 10 Commandments, he didn't need any physical. But still, when he would hear God on a day-to-day basis, it would be from that section. Why? Because the Torah is what it's all about. That's where the Shekhinah is. Interesting point is that the top. By the way, interesting point is that is why we find that the tablets were really extremely miraculous. The tablets on which the 10 Commandments were engraved were not physically, naturally possible. For starters, we are told that the tablets were readable. First of all, the tablets were engraved, and they were engraved all the way through. In other words, if there was a hole or if there was a line, you were able to see directly through that line or that letter or whatever it was, all the way through to the other side. And yet, the tablets were readable, completely legible on both sides in the correct way, which is obviously what?
How come it's possible?
Right, which is obviously a natural impossibility.
3 dimensions.
Not only that. I would say it was only one dimension, it was a godly dimension. But whichever way. Not only that, there's another interesting thing which says that the mem and the samach ben nes hayu omdin, which means that the letters mem and samach, right? So for those of you that are not familiar, a final mem looks basically like a square. I'll do my best. I'm not a great artist, but I'll do my best. looks something. Well, that's more like a samach.
That's good.
It's good. Says from Michelangelo himself. And the mem looks something like that. I think these both look like a samach, but they both look something along those lines. The common denominator. Anybody? There's a portion in the middle that's not connected to anything, right? So if you're making that letter and you're engraving it out of stone, the part marked with an X would have to hang in midair, and it did. It's suspended. Okay, so that's a little easier for us to comprehend in our physical imagination, but there was definitely something miraculous and unnatural about the supernatural, I should say. Unnatural makes it sound derogatory.
How old these descriptions came to us?
How old? These descriptions, thousands of years.
No, but who wrote them? How
It's
was it?
it's written down in the Talmud, but it was transmitted from the people who actually saw it.
Oh, okay.
All the Jewish people saw the tablets. When Charleston, what's his name?
Heston.
Heston
Is that true?
came down on the top of the. He was holding them, and you were able to see.
Solid sapphire, or
Come again?
is it true it was carved on like a solid sapphire or something?
Sapphire. Yes.
Sapphire.
Sorry, I thought you said fire. Yes, sapphire. I think that is correct. I don't remember offhand. This point I looked up before the lesson. I did not look up the material that the tablets were made out of. It was definitely a precious stone. It could be that there's a difference in
Not
which.
the hardest one.
Right, and it could be that, that there's a difference between which stone it was made out of for the first tablets and the second tablets, because remember there was the
First
was all
one
that.
was broken.
Regardless, all of this was located, all of this supernaturalness and whatever, it was all located inside the ark, inside the Holy of Holies of the Holy Temple. Now, this would also go to explain why the Talmud in Shabbat tells, the Talmud in Yoma tells us that the Shekhinah did actually not rest in the second temple with the same fortitude as it did in the first temple. Anybody know what the difference was between the first temple and the second temple? There are a number of them. They're all brought down in the Talmud as a list, actually. One of the main ones. Anybody care to guess? In the second temple, there was no ark. We are told, though, when Shlomo HaMelech built the Holy Temple, this you may know from watching Raiders of the Lost Ark. I actually never watched it. I should, right? It should be like required watching for a rabbi, like the Ten Commandments and Fiddler on the Roof and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Anyways, he built these secret tunnels, sort of, underneath the temple. And part of that was natural, and part of that was supernatural, and the ark was hidden from them. And when it came to building the second temple, right, which was built by in more of a natural fashion. Obviously, there was the supernatural involved, but it was built in much more of a natural fashion. And many, many years later, they couldn't find the ark. So eventually, they said, "Okay, obviously the ark wasn't meant to be there." They moved on.
It functioned the same way on Yom Kippur.
They functioned exactly the same way on Yom Kippur. They also didn't.
It was there.
They also.
Only later we don't know where it is. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the ark is somewhere, still exists somewhere. But we sent our best man, Indiana Jones, to go find it, and we couldn't. So.
But back in the day,
When Mashiach comes, we are told that the ark will come back exactly as it was. And back in the day, in the first temple, they had it, and it was there in the Holy of Holies, but in the second temple, it wasn't. So there
how
was
did
an
they
ark.
do Yom Kippur?
They still did Yom Kippur, and the Shekhinah still found itself in that room, but it did not find itself in the same manner. It wasn't to the same fortitude because the ark wasn't there. Well, because that ark wasn't there, and the Ten Commandments, the Luchot, weren't there. There was obviously an ark. They built an ark, another one, as it says in the Torah to build it, but the original one wasn't there. There's a lot of like legend and lore here that everybody wants to know
Did they
about.
build it?
I don't know all the details.
Did they build it with the angels?
With the angel, with the cherubim, you
Yeah,
mean?
cherubim,
Yeah,
yeah.
that it says that in the Torah. It says clearly in the Torah that there should be those. Okay, so Tanya explains, based on older mystical books which he quotes, that actually the levels which we're talking about here are Malchus. In the first temple was Malchus of Atzilus, which is the highest realm, was what found itself there. And obviously from there it would manifest itself slowly through Malchus of Atzilus to Malchus of Yetzirah, Malchus of Bria, then Yetzirah, then Asiya, etc. As come down. In the second temple, it was more Malchus of Yetzirah that evolved down from into the Holy of Holies. First of all, Malchus Yetzirah, then to Asiya, and then into the physical manifestation of the ark. All this is nice, fine and dandy, right? And God willing, it will all be super relevant for us with the coming of Mashiach and the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. But what about today? Right? Today we find ourselves without the Holy Temple. So let's turn to the Gemara again, to the Talmud, to figure out, so where is the Shekhinah now? Right? We've quoted this before here in this class. The Talmud tells us in Tractate Berachot that Mishachara Beit HaMikdash, so we're in section 2 now, by the way. We're discussing the Shekhinah nowadays. We're on page 673. The Talmud tells us, Mishachara Beit HaMikdash, after the second temple was destroyed, Ein lo la'kadosh baruch hu va'olamo, God does not have a presence, does not have a space in this world, Ella daled amot shel halacha. The best place that he finds for himself is the 4 cubits, which is just halachic or Talmudic slang for a space, right? Shel halacha bilvad, only in the space of halacha, Jewish law, which is emblematic, obviously, of the entire Torah, because Jewish law embodies within it the entire Torah. Now, if you think about it, this actually isn't so surprising, right? What did we say the whole reason that the holiness in the first temple was? It was the 10 Commandments, which were an embodiment of the Torah, which is essentially the Shekhinah of Hashem, the presence of Hashem, right? Not only that Shekhinah is anyways, always, to a certain degree, watered down. Meaning watered down. I don't know if watered down is the right word, but it's evolved down. In other words, it goes from Malchus of Atzilut, it's starting from Chachma, down to Malchus of Atzilut, to Bria of Atzilut, Yetzirah, to Malchut of Bria, to Malchut of Yetzirah, to Malchut of Asiya, till it comes all the way down to the physical Torah. Right? In today's day and age, we can access that same level of godliness, or probably not exactly the same thing, but if we want to connect to the Shekhinah, if we want to connect to God's presence itself, we should connect to the Torah. Right? Which is why, what is the blessing that we make before we study the Torah? Different than every other blessing that we make. Whenever we make a blessing, we say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, right? Blessed are you, Lord our God, who master of the universe, right? King of the universe. If it's a blessing on something that we're enjoying, we move right on to saying what we're making the blessing on. Borei priya eitz, he who creates fruit of the tree, fruit of the ground, sustenance, whatever it is. If it's a mitzvah, there's another couple words, which is Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav b'tzivanu. He who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to, and then we say whatever the mitzvah is, right? Al netilat yadayim, etc. When it comes to the blessing on the Torah, the men here will certainly know this blessing from when they get an aliyah and their bar mitzvahs, etc. Right? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Right? So there's the first blessing, which is blessing Hashem for choosing us from among the nations and giving us the Torah. And then the second blessing is actually Asher kiddushanu Elokeinu melech haolam noten Torah. The fact that God gives us the Torah. And one of the reasons that's brought down why we make this blessing before we study the Torah is because a slight meditation is required before we study the Torah. And that meditation is who gave us the Torah. In other words, we're going to study the Torah. It's not just who gave us the Torah, like, as a thank you. It's who gave us the Torah. In other words, what is the Torah? The Torah is an embodiment of the wisdom of God. It's essentially our direct path, our non-stop flight to godliness. So before we study the Torah, if we're conscious of that, it'll affect us much more. The main difference is that in today's day and age, our main relationship with Torah is actually through action. There seems to be an obsession almost throughout the whole Torah as we know it, in other words, the text of the Torah as we know it, with action. Everything we do requires action. As a matter of fact, is that there's a long conversation in the Talmud, because some of the mitzvahs actually only involve speech, not action. There's a long conversation in the Talmud as to whether speech constitutes action or not, whether speech actually is an action or not, because you're moving your lips, and for the most part, the conclusion there is that actually even akimat sifata, which means the movement of your lips, is actually considered an action. Why is that?
It's a verb.
Right.
Say.
Right. Oh yeah, exactly, in English. But why is that in this physical world, our main relationship with the Torah is action? Why is that? Because it is the lowest form of Shekhinah that there is. It's the most actualized form. It's the most physical action. It is a physical manifestation of godliness. It's the most evolved form, if we could call it that, of Torah that there is. So now we can get back to a statement which you may or may not remember, which we brought from the Zohar. It was brought from, in the name of a young child in the Zohar, that we brought about 2.5 weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago when we learned chapter 50, 51. And the Zohar brings this interesting metaphor that the Shekhinah is found above a person's head. And it's like a candle. And you got to feed that candle with oil. And a person who is careful, a person who is worthy and godly, he makes sure that he's feeding that candle with oil and that he doesn't let the flame go out. The Zohar explains what is this cryptic message. It's referring to the Torah and the mitzvot, right? Torah and Ma'asim Tovim, as it's called in the right, good deeds, which feed the godliness that rests above our heads. Right? So now that we have a little more understanding that what is Shekhinah, what is the way that God chose to embody his godliness here in this world, is specifically through the Torah and mitzvot. So by us studying the Torah and doing the mitzvot, we are actually not just feeding ourselves, our own neshama, etc., but we're actually feeding, quote, this candle, I guess, that's on top of our head, or however the metaphor goes. Essentially, we're feeding the Shekhinah. The Alter Rebbe gives the example. He says, just like, because he says essentially the Shekhinah lives off the consumption of fire. Right? He says, just like a candle, in order for it to live, it has to be consuming oil. Right? A fire, in order for it to be lit, has to be consuming wax or oil or something that it's consuming at all times. So too, the Shekhinah thrives off the consumption of the Nefesh HaBahamit, off of the burning of the animal soul. And this is where the Alter Rebbe begins to wrap up the entire Tanya. Kadiskafya sitra achra, the Alter Rebbe says. Right, meaning not here, but elsewhere. That the purpose of creation in this whole world, which we've discussed at length, was that a person should take his own wants, desires, needs, and put them aside for God's. Right? Chaya just came back from seminary. She was telling us how one of her teachers brought it as a practical mechanism. That every time before you take your baron, you're about to put it in your mouth, hold on 1 second, and think that you're going to delay your own gratification for God. In that moment, you're going to think about godliness. She was trying to illustrate this concept. She was saying, before you put the food in your mouth, just say the words a couple times. This is the desires of my own animal soul. Do I need this for sustenance? Am I eating? And then, if you have a moment to think about that, then go ahead, you can eat. Then when you do, then when you do internalize whatever physical sustenance it is, it's with the right direction, right?
What does iskafia mean?
What have we done then? Iskafia means bending. Right? We've spoken about iskafia and ishapcha. Iskafia means to bend. In other words, to coerce our own desire, and instead, eventually, ishapcha transform it into a desire towards godliness, right?
Basically,
But the first level is, let's bend the desire of nefesh bahamis. Let's hold it at bay. It's not the most important thing in my life. With proper meditation, with enough time, it looks like Baron succeeded already because his meditation was enough.
The flame getting high.
Right. What is a proper meditation? Is the only reason I'm eating this is because I want to be able to serve God. I need the sustenance. Therefore, I need to have these sugar-coated pecans in order to serve God. Right. That's the only way to do it. This is what we mean when we talk about this. That godliness thrives off of the consumption or the burning of the desire of nefesh bahamit. We've discussed already why God needed to create the animalistic soul, why we have desires that are the opposite of godliness, right? The purpose of it all is that just as a flame, and this is interesting because God is actually called in Devarim. There's a pasuk, there's a verse that says ki what's the Hebrew words? Ki Hashem Elokim eish ochlahu. That God, your God, is an all-consuming fire, right? And it's referring to this concept that God, what does God want in this world? That we should start to lift ourselves above this world. That we should submit ourselves. Bitul, we spoke about, right? We should submit our own ego, our own desire, push it aside, and allow in the existence of godliness a little bit.
It's easy to say.
I think a lot of things in Tanya are much easier said than done. This essentially is the end of Tanya, but building off what Margarita shared with us, easier said than done. I heard as I was coming to this lesson, I was messaging a friend of mine, back then the last chapter of Tanya, he says, are you planning to share that thought about the word Tanya. I said, what are you referring to? So he says, well, the word Tanya is actually spelled very interestingly. It's spelled Taf Nun Yud Aleph. The first letter, Tanya, right? Taf Nun Yud Aleph, Tanya. The first letter is Taf, which is the last letter of the alphabet. And the last word of Tanya is Aleph, which is the first word of the alphabet. And one of the things the Hasidim have always said as Habrengans, and I don't know what the source of this thought is that why is that? It's not for no reason. It's because at the beginning of Tanya, you think you know the whole alphabet. You think you know it all. I can tell you all the way till Taf, all the way to the last letter. By the time you get to the end of Tanya, you're holding Aleph. You have to start all over again. And you realize, oh, I know a lot less than I think I know. And I'm definitely a lot, I've got a lot of work to do. Like Marguerite says, easier said than done. But this is the end of Tanya, of the 53 chapters of Sefer Shel Beinonim. And the Alter Rebbe ends off with the words, excuse me, Nishlam Chelek Rishon Be'ezrat Hashem Yitbarech V'Yitaleh, with God's help, may He be blessed and exalted. This concludes the first part of the Tanya, the book of the In-Betweeners, Sefer Shel Beinonim. And with this, we will for the last time say, well, that wasn't what I was going to say. I was going to say, and with this we conclude Jewish mysticism lessons in Tanya. In this case, it's chapter 53, but it's also the entire Tanya. And the woohoo is because she's super excited that now she gets to work on herself. Because till now, everybody kept putting it off. Like, I can't yet. I can't work on myself. I don't know all the rules. There's nothing
next
now.
Week when I
now
know
you exactly now. Next week when I know it, but now you know it all. Now it's time for us all to get to work.
Now it's time.